record. I think everything looks good. Cool. So let's see here. Today we are kind of going off of, I guess, the message you sent a few days ago. Just kind of some ideas, projects, efforts you've been kind of working on, and maybe sort of a working session in that regard. So yeah, man,
Yeah.
what's on your mind? What's up with it?
Yeah. So I was mostly trying to figure out the best way to start from a teaching perspective, like where to start on cards work.
Right.
My initial thought was starting with gender, but the differentiations in masculine and feminine
Mm-hmm.
that are inherent. But I was thinking might want to go down to physics because physics is kind of like the baseline. Um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I got to the conclusion. Sorry, I'm trying to like mess with a couple different settings here.
Oh, you're
Sure,
good.
chat. Here we go. Yeah, continuous recursive disambiguation is what he calls that mouth soup. But essentially, the, it's the baseline concept is pressure,
Right.
right? So everything in existence comes from pressure, and that's what refines it and makes it into, you know, randomness in essence. And I was
Right.
trying to cut. I went through like ten of his videos that
Yeah.
I could remember of him mentioning things, and the one that I think he explained it the best um, was the one he did back in January of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe he only recently posted it. Let me figure out. Here.
Yeah, I wanted to say. So yeah, I've probably got a whole background on that. Um,
Can you see?
I see your screen. Yeah.
What do you see now?
So it was the Discord window. Now it's kind of just nothing. It's like a black square, but it's also flashing back and forth between that and the Discord window. And now it's gone. All right.
Now?
So now I can click watch stream. Now we got a desktop.
Okay, sweet. Which program was it? I think it was this one. That is not Libre. No, it's this one. I really have to get better at naming things.
Oh yeah, my organization's pretty shit on my computer.
Okay. Um, this was the edit that I kept. I had like 5 lines and 5 different ones. I got rid of all of them because it just was not useful for what I was trying to do.
Okay.
Um, yeah. But anyway, he a couple of different times says like a series of contexts that I think probably should be introduced first when we're deconstructing his work. Because my logic was that at a baseline, if you don't understand where you came from, you can't understand where you are, right?
Right.
And the most simple way that I've seen it explained in his autistic detail that's understandable is this here. I'm hoping that you can hear because I don't know if
Uh,
I even.
I probably won't be able to. I don't think.
Okay, it makes you feel better. I couldn't hear it either. So,
That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. We can. We can dive into it. We can figure that out. I'm sure there. Actually,
yeah,
I want to say I thought Discord did share the town. Anyway, yeah, we'll figure that out more. But I wanted to add some context because yeah, that's a very you definitely have tapped into a very core concept in his work. Sorry, I got shit in my throat. So there was a as I was learning the work, I was identifying a lot of these things, and also just a quick side note: do you mind unsharing your screen just so that I can go back to the
yeah.
main window because it's sharing the same window into the thing. All right, close stream. Perfect. Okay, so as I was learning it, I was coming across a lot of this like word salad and like complex concepts, and I was like, what are they trying to say here? Because I connect with a lot of it, but I feel like we're on the same page. We're just maybe describing it differently. So like yeah, like continuous recursive disambiguation is definitely one of those, and the way that I've seen it is pretty much the definition for evolutionary computation. Like evolutionary computation was like the core word that really I think encapsulated that. And now it got complex again whenever we got together as like a team and said, how do we want to define evolutionary computation? And that's where it got back to the word salad, and it's like continuous, recursive, disambiguation. I'm just like, no one's gonna understand that. But you've already tapped into like a good summary, which is like disorder to order or chaos to order. That's already a pretty good, or disentropy to entropy or entropy to disentropy. So yeah, that I think that's what it comes down to, as far as a simpler, more didactic or more teachable verbiage goes. So
Yep. I got it to work if you were able to listen. I clipped it.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-hour podcast. I clipped it into chunks,
Okay.
like 5-minute chunks.
Okay.
This was yeah. I have not had any caffeine today, so my brain is scrambled.
Yeah, especially like when you start drinking caffeine and then you're without it, then you're really fucked. But if you luckily, I'm just so sensitive to it that I can't drink it at all. All right, so
I'm drinking decaf right now.
Yep. All right, let's see.
And so what you end up with
Okay, I hear
is
it now.
once you've got
Can you hear Kurt speaking?
Yep, I can hear it. Yep.
pieces together, you begin to see that there's one multi-universe. It's very simple now, whether it's in language, the physical laws, the behavioral laws, evolutionary laws. And the entire universe is reducible to one basic principle. And sort of like in a fractal expression, this principle shows up in everything.
It's like mental graph.
So, sorry?
Like a mental graph fractal.
Exactly. It just shows up everywhere. Everything's a variation of this.
Tell us what it is, quick.
That's continuous recursive disambiguation of disorder into order, despite the fact that the disorder, which we call entropy, is the result of pressure.
Jesus.
Okay. So all languages consists of continuous recursive disambiguation into a state of meaning, which you and I can then falsify by when we say understanding, and then agree with it, disagree with it, or say I need more information. So that's
What makes you so confident things are heading towards order and not the reverse?
also things don't head towards order. It's that
Right. So that was the first like little chunk of him explaining it that I thought I was gonna start with that. And then there was a longer chunk that was like 4 minutes, 5 minutes ish, where he literally goes and breaks down a sequence as an example. And actually that specific sequence is what he should have started with to begin with.
Yeah.
But because he's he was like really on point in this video, but he has good days and bad days.
Yeah.
But, that first segment, thoughts.
I said, yeah, that's a good overview. And I will say I'll add a piece in there, which I think, like I see that you're going into it with this frame of like, I'm trying to kind of like disambiguate Kurt's work or try to make it more understandable and break it down. But I think one frame that might help is just like, you are just developing a description on your own and you're using Kurt's explanation as kind of fuel, inspiration, or kind of as a foundation for that. That way you're not limited to trying to like work within his frame necessarily. I mean, it's a good frame, but just because of the IQ and the Asperger type thing, it's just like it's hard to work solely within their diction, within their frame. So that's just an idea. But if you are operating and are comfortable within that, then that's totally fine. I just wanted to throw that out there. But
it's not replicatable though. That's why you can't use their frame.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unless you have type 1 Asperger's, which I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't work. And I mean, you have probably maybe their reach is no more than 15,000.
Yeah.
For people who are going to continuously show up, and because all Aspies are inherently OCD and they like repetition and pattern, anyone who finds him, they're going to constantly be stimulated, and so they'll stay with him. So He has a cult following, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, his follower count has not increased on YouTube in ever.
Right.
And he's been doing this for 10 years.
They're not really interested in in any kind of populism, is what they talk about. They're always like, let's go try to target some elites that are already established, and it's just like, to me, that's more. I mean, we need to do both. We can do some populism and some elites and everywhere in between. But they're kind of like, they're like really focused on elites, and between the two, between like a populist route and an elite route, like I'm like, I'd rather go populist. But yeah, they definitely feel like they can get elites. But
yeah, and
I don't know.
I feel like what he's trying to do is almost like what Nietzsche was doing in the 1800s. He understood the world
Mhm.
and he understood where it was going, and he wrote it out in a way that no one could understand for 200 years.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
didn't even understand Nietzsche until after World War II. And we were looking back, we were like, oh, that's what he was talking about. And
right.
then we got it. My worry with Kurt is I've gone over his work a lot.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, this is clear as day. I see what he's saying. And no one's going to understand this until we're 200 years into a dark age.
Yeah, or unless people like us try to make sense of it and get it out
And
there
so
in a
I have,
better language.
I don't want to ignore it, but at the same time, I'm like trying to figure out in my brain how I would translate this and where to start.
Yes.
And by the way, it's taken me like I was working on this for about 5 hours, and I got one, which is like the first segment. And I didn't even start on it yet because I was trying to figure out how to translate it. And I had like all these scratch notes, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, there's so much overlap
Yeah.
that if I can't, it's kind of like educating a fourth grader. It's like, how do I deconstruct this in a way that's not so stupid
Right.
that it makes it wrong, but
Yes.
I can translate it in enough sense.
Yes, and
That's what's
yeah,
been most
that's
difficult.
that was been my like a core theme of my interaction and discussion with them is like I know it needs to be even for my own learning I feel like it can be simple, but also me trying to teach this to anybody else. There's so many layers to which we could break it down and make it easy to understand, but that is of course the fear or the thing you need to be careful about is making sure you're not losing too much fidelity to where the message gets scrambled or lost. And that's one thing they always talk about. They're like, you can't see, you always hear Kurt like, I simplified this as much as you can. He simplified
Like, no,
it
you
as
did
much
it.
as he simplified it as much as he can. But
No, no, no.
we need to pick it
You
up from
can't
there.
simplify it. No, no. So this is something that I learned watching Eric Weinstein.
Mhm.
If you have a high enough IQ, dumbing things down below a certain point you find insulting.
Yeah.
Kurt can dumb things down. He did in this video, by the way. There's the next segment that I
Right.
cut out. Um, he chooses not to
Right.
because he's above that, and I understand from his perspective
Yes.
at his age, especially.
He won't. Yeah. He won't. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So which is
but yeah,
fine. Which
this
is
yeah,
totally fine. Yeah. Like I mean I get it. But yeah, once again, that's opportunity for people like us to do that. I mean, that's how it works. So, and I like what you're doing with that. You're kind of stepping into that task and playing around with it and seeing how it'll go because you see that it's a good effort. And then you've already addressed one of the things, which is this like it's a very complex thing. One of the first things you need is a good starting point. What's a good concept? You've already done. You've arrived at a good place saying, I think this evolutionary computation is a good pervasive theme that works through it all. And you specifically, like you said, you kind of
it's scalable. That's what's most important. Is in
right,
order to have a starting point when I'm not going into the whole, monarchist style thing that he's pushing, and he's got a couple of different paths
mm-hmm,
across all sectors of academia that actually matter. But like when you're teaching a general thing, my thought was we would start with the let's call it metaphysics of the society, which is actual physics,
right,
and we can move from physics to science, and then from science we would move to nature,
yeah,
right, and then from nature to culture, from culture to I got as culture is as far as I got, and I was thinking about in my head scalability because after you get to culture, you have a choice to where you can go towards anthropology, which is like what if autists thing,
right,
or you can go towards like the future. So it's like past and future was kind
right,
of like where I went because if the present is not super useful.
mm-hmm,
We want to understand the future, you just have to look around. And if you have, I don't want to have to sit here and explain to people the current future because if they don't see it with their own eyes, I can't explain this to them to begin with.
right,
So then we go back to the scalability of the multitudes issue, which there will always be a cap, but I think we're trying to take this from high level postdoc thesis down to like a 4-year degree, and then I'd be satisfied to be honest.
let's just get it that far. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and then from there it could be scaled down further.
agree.
But yeah, as far as I got was culture. But yeah, right now I'm working on physics, and then I have enough physics knowledge to be able to kind of move forward with it. But I'm just trying to figure out how I would want to. I don't know if I want to take ChatGPT and just strip out everything he said and then reword it. And then videos would come later once the words were down. But
you probably saw me on Twitter, like whenever he started using ChatGPT, I was like, this is awesome. Like ChatGPT does such a good job of like trying to translate and make sense of it. And like he took a liking to ChatGPT and was like really kind of playing with it. And I really loved to see that interaction. I was like, it's your fourth wife. It's a match made in heaven. So two things I want to throw out there. So one is that you know we will probably want to choose a starting point as to how we unfold it. But one thing to always remember is that, as you know, depending on who's coming to it, there's a lot of different hooks or starting points for them. Like no matter where you start, whether it's a biology or just your personal life or physics, whatever, you can start to navigate the network from that as long as you have an entry point. So that's one thing I always keep in mind. But we do have to kind of express it in some way. And so one thing I come back to is just the idea of just like a story or a narrative, which I know you've talked about before, the importance of narrative and structure. And so just like a story, and how do most stories unfold just from chronologically, like from the beginning to the end. Even the Bible, you know, in the beginning, blah 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 blah. So you know that's one thing, and in doing so, we would pretty much still start out with physics like you are doing. You know, for me, here's how it works in my head. Like, you know, it's very simple, but it's just like, you know, you've got the Big Bang, then you've got gaseous hydrogen out there from that original explosion. Those things, and then you also have the forces, you know, like gravity, nuclear. What is it basically, like gravity, nuclear forces, like. Those are the main ones.
Gravity is summarized as pressure. That's what creates the pressure.
Yes, and that's all you really need. And then from that, you know, the gravity helps the hydrogen, you know, manifest into stars, which then go through their cycles. You know, they can explode, create other heavier elements, and then those heavier elements interact within gravitational situations to, you know, snowball into like planets, and then, you know, the idea of what's it called, orbiting, and all the kind of phenomenon that we see in the cosmos kind of is all explainable within that gravitational model pretty much, and those initial conditions. And so we're already starting to tap our toes into chemistry a little bit. We're saying like hydrogen and manifesting and heavier elements. Now we've got the structure of planets, and then you've got the structure of solar systems. You've got energy. You've got heat from stars. You've got nitrogen and hydrogen and oxygen and some of these other gaseous elements.
That pressure in combination with those planets and those stars,
yes,
when they become in contact, they can ionize and merge, and that can create life.
Yes,
if it happens at enough times at random.
Exactly.
And then life develops a need to move, and then that's where, you know, that scales up into a nervous system, and then, you know, so
yeah. So that was a super. You did that really. You did like millions of years in like 10 words. That was really impressive. I wanted to go back to. So you're right. Like you've got these planetary systems. There's no atmosphere yet, but as a part of gravity, you've got other elements that have come from star explosions or
they're random puzzle pieces, and it's like, you know, the Yahtzee jar. You just shake it enough times, and some of them will stick.
Right there. So I've always, you know, whenever you talk about evolution, everyone thinks about biological evolution. If anything, it may be like psychological or technological evolution. But that right there, what you're talking about, is an example of. This is why I love the term evolutionary computation, because it takes evolution beyond these like normal ways you think about it and takes it to like just
evolution is actually more of a Christian zeitgeist if you think about it. Because whenever you say evolution, their immediate thought is not. Well, no, their immediate thought is their surroundings.
Right.
And so I've always wondered, when I'm communicating with the Christians at a baseline level, let's say I'm speaking about natural law, right?
Yeah.
How could I remove the what they perceive as the enemy? Because, you know, we recognize patterns, and when you have a meme as a foundation for the way you fit society and the world you see into the holes that your meme provides you. It's your net.
Right.
Nothing gets through that net. And so when I say evolution, all the Christians immediately snap out and they say, "Heathen, you're going to hell." And I'm like, okay, hold on. I always try to, like, how do I? And also, it got worse with James Lindsay, because James Lindsay pretty much conditioned all the conservatives to be hypersensitive to words.
Right.
to the point where anything from like normative, it's like a trigger word, for them now. And
Yeah.
so it's like they speak in like these blunt force caveman terms now.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing it actively because they've been conditioned by fear mongering.
God.
And so I'm trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to solve for that at the same time. Because by the way, they're like 40% of the population, if not 50, and they have the higher rings of the IQ as well. They're just dissonant, and so they can compartmentalize the world they inhabit with their high IQ and Christianity as well.
Yeah.
And so I've always that's a problem that's solvable. I have not just strategized a good dialectic without inventing a new one, which takes like 10,000 years. So
Yeah. So I don't want to go too far off on this rabbit hole right now, but it is of course very critical. I will say for now that like it's always worth considering how the words and the frames that you use are going to resonate with different crowds or just in general. And a lot of times you're confronted with the decision of, is it worth trying to reframe this or reword this into something different that's not been destroyed or has bad connotations, or should we just try to purify it or try to reconcile or try to revive it? And I will say personally, evolution, just at my core and just in general, I think evolution is the most efficient, and I have a bond with that concept. And of course, yeah, whenever we work with people like Christians in particular, we might have to be strategic. So yeah, I do agree. But in general, like for you and me and a lot of the people we're going to connect with, evolution is probably fine, I think. Do you agree? Like outside of Christians, do you feel like it's pretty okay?
well, I mean, evolution is just what we offload. It's where I'm starting.
Yeah.
So this is where I differ, I think, but it's not super significant. Um, I am for evolution up until the point where we get to sentient, or let's just say life in general.
Okay.
Because the jump that I have the hardest time with, and I mentioned this, is what causes a single cell organism to to need to merge into a multi-cell organism
Okay.
that then needs to move.
Hmm. Okay.
That jump,
Mhm.
I don't care. I don't. And by the way, with evolution, for everything that works, you have 100 million things that don't
Right.
work.
Right.
And
Right.
so there should be way more variation
So
today,
okay. So
right?
or sorry, you go ahead if you had something.
No, you're good. So I understand that cataclysms, natural selection can solve for a lot of those variations over long periods of time, right? Um, but then that would show up in the DNA, and it doesn't. And by the way, DNA doesn't fit into any segment of evolution. It's alien, literally. It's not DNA is not fit anywhere on the evolutionary scale. So we haven't solved for that yet, which is why I am pro evolution up until the point of there's a period of time that we're missing where something occurred,
Yeah.
which is why I am more on the fence of the unconscious God phenomena that Jung referenced,
Hmm.
which is God is not sentient. He is an amalgamation of like almost like he's sleeping in a way, and then
Okay.
he wakes up when we call his attention to things,
Oh
but
wow.
he'll just randomly do things. And
I like
so
that.
you ever, I mean, Futurama did this best, I think.
Oh
In their
yeah.
episode, remember when Bender was shot into space and they had that little cloud of gas, and
Trying to
he was
remember.
just existing, and he was like making random planets and it was doing random things, and he
Wow.
didn't know they were praying to him. He was like, "Wait, what are you guys doing?" Like he didn't know, and he was unconscious, but all of potential was there,
Yeah.
and that can solve for DNA. That can solve for the jumps in evolution that we're missing. Um, which actually doesn't even conflict with evolution, because it doesn't have to be a person or it's an entity. It's
Hmm.
something more abstract,
Hmm.
but it still is causing formations to
Yes.
create. um I didn't know if that was going to be, I'm not going to weave that in when we're explaining the scalability from physics on upward,
Well,
but
it's relevant, and a lot of the things you're saying, as far as like the particular qualms with the evolutionary narrative, I do want to revisit those, and I think we're already headed in that direction. Like we started talking about like the Big Bang and the formation of planets, and we will get there. But before we do, I want more of a semantic clarification, which is what I'm getting at is that I think of evolution, or specifically evolutionary computation in its larger sense. I define that as basically adaptation via mutation and selection. And as an example, like you were just talking about, like even before life emerges, you've got different chemicals floating around in a soup or in the air. And some, by chance, after millions of random interactions and millions of years, some chemicals are going to come close enough to contact that they're going to bond and form new elements. So to me, that to me is an example of evolutionary computation, because you have the mutation, which is the chaos of just random actions, interactions, particles moving. That's chaos, that's mutation. And then you have selection, which is out of that, like you said, 99% of mutations suck or are not good or do nothing. But 1% of the time you'll get the right mix and you'll form a new element. And therefore it's like it's been selected, right? So do you kind of, does that fit for you as like a definition for evolutionary computation? Could you get with that, or how do you? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt likes to say that it's not the Pareto distribution, but it is.
Mm-hmm. Remind me what the Pareto is. I hear a lot of people use it, and I always forget what it is.
Oh yeah, it's just the Matthew principle. To those who have more will be given. To those who have less will be taken. I mean, if I take a field and I light it on fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
There will be an equal amount of random seeds growing up. Well, over 100 years, that entire field will be one seed or two, right? I mean, that's the Pareto distribution, and it's so evolution. That's natural. It's natural selection too. So if you have a series of humanoid types,
mm-hmm.
one will dominate across all of the others for whatever reason. It's because it's resource allocation. Same thing with money. Capitalism, communism, money. It doesn't. No matter what, all replicatable entities within natural order operate on the Pareto distribution.
Okay.
So that's something that Christians cannot come to terms with, by the way. They don't like that.
Well, I'm trying to think. So I can understand. So if you're defining Pareto distribution as kind of like the idea that like how power or hierarchy emerges, is that a decent sentence?
I mean, it's not exempt from hierarchy. It's kind of like alongside hierarchy. Maybe it encompasses.
Is that the 80-20 thing? Yeah.
Kind
80,
of,
20.
yeah.
80% of outcomes are due to 20% of causes. Okay, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so I can see how that's a larger pattern that could be applied to almost all systems and interactions. I could get with that.
Yeah. Well, and then it kind of fits really well on top of the pressure phenomenon.
Okay.
Right? Because we're always scaling outward. Pressure pushes, enacting the Pareto distribution.
So here's one thing I want to come back to, because we talked about pressure very early on alongside gravity. So obviously, like gravity, like pressure is not considered one of the fundamental forces. Pressure emerges in like vacuums. Like it needs like a constraint. It's a constrained environment.
Gravity causes pressure.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons. That's one of the issues that the electric universe people have, is they don't solve for gravity, which is why they're so easily debunked.
Well, tell me this: is there an example of pressure outside, like in space, like outside of a planet? Is there an example of pressure?
Stars are pressure,
and that's because it's the gravity pulling the particles together, and that creates pressure.
So pressure is random until it's not.
Okay, so basically, yeah. So pressure is pretty much created by gravity. It's like.
And by the way, this is extrapolated all the way up through into human nature. If we don't put pressure on our bodies,
yes,
i.e., physical, mental, like stress, we get weak and we shrivel away.
We
need pressure to be competence and resilience and things like that.
Evolution requires environmental pressures to adapt.
Yep, and so pressure is all the way from hyper-specific evolutionary mutations like us, all the way far out to planets, and then all the way down to like memetics and constructs. All of it requires pressure.
Yeah, and it's like energy too, because we're talking about how elements are formed, and it's like so gravity is what like pulls together stars. So, but it's either like that pulling together, which either that itself may create the kind of pressure or energy required to create certain reactions, but then otherwise there is like, I guess certain things can ultimately cause explosions, which is kind of a nuclear type reaction, not a gravitational reaction.
Yeah, but I understand that, but the goal is to summarize and quantify to the bare minimum as possible,
Right.
and then we can extrapolate when needed. But when we're translating, we want to be able to keep it as compact as possible, which is why I'm trying to avoid tack-ons, which is like
Yeah.
nuclear as a tack-on.
Yeah.
I know reduction is dangerous, but in this instance, I think reduction might be necessary until we can get a concrete pattern or like
Yeah.
a paragraph to extrapolate from.
Yeah, so yeah, also let's be careful about going too detailed. I appreciate that you're seeing that as well. So let's go back a bit. So let's just say we agree. Obviously the Big Bang, the gravity, the formation, the pressure, the formation of stars, explosions of stars, the formation of heavier elements, the coalescing of heavier elements via gravity and pressure into planets. And then those planets attracting other molecules and chemicals, which can then, through evolutionary computation, can potentially form other more complex chemicals like methane and other gases and so forth. So we agree with all that. And so, via simply hydrogen and oxygen, you can have, if you're in the Goldilocks zone with the right pressure and so forth, you can get some semblances of a water cycle going. Right, a water cycle doesn't require any. That's not biological. That's totally just those are chemical processes and reactions of pressure.
But you can make water just by having a planet and a sun. Because
Exactly.
hydrogen comes in contact with the atmosphere and it ionizes the hydrogen and it turns into water.
Exactly, and that's where we're at. We're saying, okay, we've got just a ball, a rock ball, and a sun that it orbits around, and it's not too close and it's not too far away. And so, out of the billions of stars and planets, it's an evolutionary computation. Like most of them, it'll never happen, but there is a chance that it will be in the right zone, in the right orbit for the chemical operations for water to take place. Now, I want to make a quick note here, which is that a frame that I always keep is about the fact that that's even possible, the fact that we're even in a universe that has the right forces and the right initial Big Bang for this to happen is still a very powerful, mystical, spiritual kind of experience that kind of indicates some kind of intelligence or intention.
Obviously, evolution has holes. That's one of the holes, right?
Well,
and so one of no, it is because
well, I agree, but I wouldn't call it a hole.
the unconscious God phenomenon, I think, really iron tight solves for that.
So and I kind of agree with you. Like the unconscious God, that's kind of more what it aligns with, because like basically, I don't.
It explains without mystifying why random material can exist in a vacuum,
Right.
without making it deified.
Well, think about this though. Like, but yes, we've built this whole model on these basic first principles like gravity and Big Bang, or just basically like the Big Bang and the forces, the existing physical forces. Like that's all we needed, and we could explain everything else based on that. But it's still like, well, who or what created that? And that's going to be the mystery, and that's where it gets into the room for the spiritual and so forth. But we don't need that. We don't have to have that right now. I just wanted to make a quick note that like this for me is one of those things where like, wow, like the fact that this is even possible. We've explained it. We understand it. It's not mystical to an extent, but it also is. But, I don't know. So it's like weird.
There is room for mysticism. I think.
Yeah, I agree. There we go. So coming back, so we've got you've got the formation of a water cycle, an atmosphere, oxygen. Well, yes, we've got those things are explainable, given physics and chemistry. So we pretty much got like Earth, but without life, just with that. You can have oceans, land, atmosphere, water cycles, and here's the key one: lightning. You can have lightning, which is energy.
Yep.
You've got, and lightning, of course, very simply is just created through like static interactions and pressure differences, and I don't know the details. That's more of a physical operation, but everyone knows, everyone has experienced lightning. You've seen it. And sorry, did you want to pause to pull up a clip off of that?
Yeah. So Kurt is actually. I wanted your take on Kurt's take. What we're discussing, Kurt goes into.
Okay.
If you look at the universe, it's under pressure. Pressure has only so many mechanical means of being relieved in the quantum fields, right? And those things are really spin, rotation, vibration, and motion. And so what you see is the waves form up from there. So what happens is from that some of that energy is dissipated, which is why the quantum field never solidifies; it always recollapses. But some of it remains, gathers enough energy to form a stable relation. That's the stable relation that can be a wave or a protoparticle, which is what we call like photons, or it can end up in particles, which have a continuous stable state, like electrons and neutrons. Okay, so and then then those things, because they're basically magnetic fields, arranged in different numbers and permutations, producing this little puzzle piece that has only so many maximum possible dimensions, i.e., carbon. And these puzzle pieces just fit together. So the universe is basically just is computing a very tiny fraction of stable relations during the process of entropy, which is the creation of dissipation. So we have a tiny bit of the universe came out as mass, right? A tiny bit of that mass turned into stars. A tiny bit of those stars went through a life cycle. In that life cycle, they produced heavier elements that can't be produced by any other means. Some of those heavier elements ended up in planets, right? A couple of those planets ended up in habitable zones. A couple of those habitable zones had enough water. A couple of those places in water had enough fluids to prevent one face facing the star, in other words, maintain rotation, and a liquid core. And a liquid core creates a magnetosphere that protects you from the saturation from the radiation. So all right, and then a few of those places that produce those stagnation radiation produce enough combinations at such temperatures that you can get the first complex proto-molecules to biological molecules, which then form into these slimes, which eventually form into cells, which eventually develop reproduction, which then eukaryotic, by combination, eukaryosis, and eukaryosis, get cellular cooperation, eventually get this thing called fucking life. So I mean, if you walk through the series, it's really obvious what's.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that was it. That's exactly what we're talking about. That was very concisely said. Walk through the steps, and I'm in total agreement. I really love that. And in addition, he also explored like a very fundamental layer, which I haven't even really thought about before. He has a better understanding of like fundamental particles and fundamental forces of physics and things
Particle
like
physics, yeah.
antimatter and matter and stuff like that. Like he understands. Like I love this like theme of pressure taken to that scale, talking about how like the spin and vibration as fundamental forces kind of emerge from that, which is really beautiful and ties in. So that's really good. I love it.
But yeah, that's been what I literally watched that like 8 times, trying to figure out how I want to strip that and to put it into like a textbook style.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, he did it really simply there. So if anything, we would kind of what do they say, like you strip it down or deconstruct it or whatever, and then you bring it back. Well, he has pretty much gotten to the juice, the core right there. So if anything, we can start to build back on top of that.
Yep. So everything he said though, down to like like you said, spin and rotation is important. I mean, obviously he made jumps just like I did, where you don't go from single cell to cells. Like there's the complexities there, but he's essentially correct.
So one thing I want to say is that like, down to the spin and energy level, like just, I feel like that's something that most people can't or won't or don't need to understand. But of course it is still important to the model. So I just wanted to say that. And, but I think it would be good for us to return to, or kind of break that story down, because you've expressed a couple different areas in that overall narrative that you're kind of stuck on. And me, I guess the only reason I'm not stuck is because I probably just haven't explored it in that much detail. I have a little bit of kind of like, oh, that makes enough sense. So let's come back to our walkthrough, which is a little bit more detailed than what he just did, and which is that we've got a planet with a water cycle, with the lightning, with an atmosphere, and he brought up a good point too, which is a certain level of magnetic protection from the radiation, which is also needed. So you got those things, but you still need a little bit of radiation for mutation. This is a huge question that I had this conversation with a lot of people, and what I think it's called abiogenesis, which is basically like you've got a pool of water, you've got like volcanic vents that's blowing up methane or some kind of gas, so you've got dissolved gases in this water, And then the theory is that you've got like a lightning strike hits the water, and that catalyzes a chemical reaction that is capable of producing things like amino acids and some of the fundamental building blocks of biology. And they have been able to recreate this experiment in a lab. They have been able to dissolve these early atmospheric gases in water and hit it with like some like electricity, and it generates amino acids.
There's also entirely likely that there's random bits of carbon and other
of
chemicals
course,
that not only don't exist today because they're probably like thousands of feet beneath us, but like they were in a place where they were swimming around in a soup.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things by the way, the lightning just attracts it.
Yes.
Or it can spin and then it would separate particles and rearrange them into different shapes. So no, that, and actually the Earth, if the Earth is still as like chaotic as it is now, there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't have been 10,000 times worse during those times, which would have created so much time for replication that there would have been excess.
Yeah, and so that's another example of evolutionary computation. If you have enough soup and enough particles and enough millions of years for interactions and lightning strikes and stuff to happen, you're eventually going to get some kind of new particles. And so here's the stage we're at. We've got like some of these amino acids and some of these fundamental building blocks. And then if enough of those are able to come together, you've got some basic like protein formulation. And this is where like I'm not a biologist or a chemical expert as well, but to me, like enough of the pieces are there and again, given billions of years and enough pressure and time and interactions, you're going to start to get more emergent complex molecules until the point where you've got something that looks kind of like a proto cell, like something that's able to almost metabolize, like it's able to take
there is also the factor that we don't really understand cells super well. The
Right.
model we have is from the 20s, and it's that standard little thing with these weird ass fucking different like ribosomes and stuff. And we really can't isolate those for the most part. And every model that scientists provide us is one that's gone through their little blenders that they throw them through. And then they use the some kind of red mineral water. I used to work with these in school and I completely forgot half the damn shit. But it's not super convincing to me. The status quo of what we call cells.
Okay.
Which is actually an interesting rabbit hole to go down, but we're not going to go all the way down there. Anyway, and when cells, if you look at them just from a standard, should just be a DNA spiral sitting in water, like a bulb,
right,
is really what it should be, and they replicate. But it's not, because otherwise we wouldn't have the variations that we do.
Yeah. So, and again, this would be something, I'm really looking forward to potentially this opportunity to take a deeper dive into this to figure out the details, because like I said, it's a little bit fuzzy for me, but you do even to have like a cell. A cell is still a pretty fucking complex thing. Like, I mean, there's so much machinery going on to be able to, this assumes
that they self-repair that we know of.
That's what I was saying. Well, modern cells are extremely complex. Like they can procreate. Like that was a huge leap, is the ability to clone yourself. Like the ability to asexually reproduce or to clone.
Well, where that came from was DNA, though. So DNA almost like spiraled its way into every individual cell.
Right.
And then the cell kind of encapsulated it in a way. Now that's not correct if you look at the textbooks, but
right.
I don't see any way that it's not.
Well, this is the argument that a lot of people make about it, is they're like, there's just so much complexity needed, and it's like very hard. Even it's like even giving like millions of years and possible interactions, they're just like, it's just way too complex, way too unlikely to get that many different pieces interacting together. Like you've got the DNA to store the information. You've got to have mechanisms to replicate it. You've got to have energy metabolizing structures. You've got to have all that contained in some kind of like basic cell. That's just like wow.
Oh, and by the way, and food consumption didn't exist for the first half of the Earth's existence. So the energy consumption doesn't. Like this is what I was telling you when we were one of the last videos. I was like, I have an issue with the quantity of time that mainstream has provided us.
Right.
Because when you get into multi-cell, for the amount of variation just in a human being, it's not like 7 trillion years, it's like 100,000 octillion. It's like 100,000 x octillion. Like it's like
Well, I mean, then again, though, the fact that we do, in theory, the fact that we exist, as explained by a model like this, might speak to the exponential power of these mechanisms once they're in place. Like once you hit these certain thresholds, you're like, damn, I got what I need now. Like once a few cells could start to reproduce or asexually reproduce, that's fucking huge.
yeah, or they'll pattern bind.
Yeah, and then asexually. Yeah, or just other ways of coming together and merging just based on chemical interactions and stuff.
No, pattern. No, where they establish a pattern and then it's coded, and then that code stays.
Exactly, and there you go. Like once you get to asexual reproduction, that's functional DNA replication, which is fucking huge. I mean that's just massive. I mean, and then you got asexual, which is even more powerful. And then it keeps exponentiating from there. Like every new, yes, you're going to have a bunch of shitty mutations or just neutral mutations, but for every small mutational advantage you have, you're going to exponentiate. And I think that is kind of what helps. That's what helps me with the time scales, but it's also just fucking hard to even think about billions of years. It's like, what even is that? But I will say, so yeah, like I'm not an expert. I would love to talk to someone and dive into the details and the theory about how we can go from soup and interactions to macromolecules.
I'm willing to bet you Kurt has it memorized if you can get him to
just
come down to earth for a second. Well, I would imagine him sitting there telling you, being like, "No, that's not my job."
Yeah, that's okay. And there's probably other there's likely other books and videos out there where people who have kind of like theorized or even maybe computationally modeled like what some of these, because of course we think about like a cell today, like, oh yeah, the cell today, like all of life shares the same shares some bit of DNA, so it all came from like some basic like thing, and it's so complex, but it's hard to like unpack that and theorize how cells could have come to be. Like you have
the issue with unpacking it is the reason I know this is because I've done it. As you unpack evolution, the theory starts to have problems that you can't solve for with current knowledge. Like when you have, like, let me give you an example. Einstein hated, I forget the name, the particle physics, where you have, it's one of the bases that had string theory come out, where like you have two particles and then you bind them, and you have one spin and the other spin. So theoretically, when you stop one, the other should keep spinning, but they don't. And no matter what the distance, when you stop the binded particle,
quantum entanglement.
Yes, quantum entanglement. Thank you. And then so the distance, no matter how far you go, when you stop one, the other stops. That shouldn't exist, but it does.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's one of those big crazy things. Yeah.
That's actually, that right there is a huge issue for evolution, because it doesn't make sense. Because that would imply that there is a plane of reality that is not material.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Or at least material that we can inhabit and touch, which complicates things.
Yes, I agree. But can you think of a specific contradiction between that model? Like, it's like, yeah, I agree. There's a fact that like particles can be entangled, that they could mirror each other no matter how distant. Like that's really trippy, ghostly behavior. But I don't think that necessarily disrupts.
Then that means that like we shouldn't, because what that means is space doesn't exist. It's like a lock.
Well, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means there is some either other dimension, or there is some force that's operating outside of our typical understanding of space, but it doesn't necessarily contradict the phenomenon that we understand and observe in the material plane, if that makes sense.
Right. And then also this goes back to it doesn't impact anything until we get to particles.
Okay.
The actual evolutionary theory sits fine.
Right.
It's the complex particles that assemble that it becomes a little more complicated.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting to like, yeah, I'll have to chew on that. Like thinking about how quantum entanglement might disrupt or support evolutionary theory, probably more likely to disrupt it. But Yeah, and you know what's really interesting about that, because you have all these ideas about how like evolution is like some kind of guided process. That'd be very fascinating. That it's like, it could be a theory that's like there is some other plane that is interacting, that's like able to like affect
Well,
the.
that's the logic with DMT elves.
Yes,
It's like we have two worlds, and
yes,
but they're connected through matter that connects to our worlds that we cannot see
right,
or interact with.
yes.
But nonetheless, it's pushing things around.
Yes. And that reminds me of another, because obviously Terrence McKenna is a huge, probably the
Yeah,
biggest inspiration
yeah.
of mine. He talked about, DMT elves. Another big
Boyle
theory of
talks
his,
about him a lot.
huh?
Uber Boyle talks about him a
Oh
lot.
hell yeah, really very cool. Yeah, I love Uber Boy. He's got a lot of the same inspirations. But yeah, anyway, one of McKenna's big ideas was called the transcendental object at the end of time, which is really just this kind of like alternative interpretation of reality and history. Whereas instead of like a cause and effect that's being driven from like the past forward, it's like we're being pulled towards something. It's like this idea that is things are predetermined and destined and kind of being steered, which is really fascinating.
Well, that's where Nietzsche got his little will to power thing when he was romanticizing
Mm.
Napoleon. He was saying that he was like possessed by something and it was calling him.
Fuck
It was
yeah.
dragging him.
Fuck yeah.
And then Hitler was the same way, and they both saw the same symbology. They saw the red circle in the sky
Yeah.
that no one else saw.
Oh man. I saw.
Um,
Ooh, it gives me chill bumps.
yeah, and that's where the German Wotan came from as well.
Wow. That gets me really excited because like I think about my psychedelic experiences, and like I definitely like, and it very is a very Jungian synchronicity type thing where it's like
And Jung is also a schizophrenic, and so we have to separate the schizophrenic from what we can concretely say probably solve some of the holes in a lot of our theories.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, like if you read the Red Book, it's like a schizophrenic streams, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt someone operating at that level would be basically on one, like, pretty much. But, all that is just to say, and even when I'm tripping, like, it feels like, obviously there's a lot of parallels between, like, kind of schizophrenic type thinking. And because the idea with schizophrenia is that you're seeing patterns and correlations that,
Well, no, you're pretty much
aren't
in a
there.
state similar to that of like a DMTI or something
Right.
along those lines.
Yeah, pretty much, because you're seeing things that aren't there. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how
The
people
thing
typically
is,
think about it.
it's messy. So their dreams are not complete. Their visions are a little wobbly.
Right.
And it's more based off of fear. It's
Mm,
not based off of intuition, which is different.
right. Yeah, I think just the main point I want to take away is just like that I have had firsthand like experience with these kind of like synchronistic ripples, so to speak. Like this kind of like you said, these great men throughout history have testified or expressed that they're being like kind of destined or pulled towards this kind of thing. It's a very it's very destiny synchronistic type thing, which is really
Yeah,
really
so
cool.
they're being dragged, but while they're being dragged, the masses drag society down, and they have to drag it up. And so every
Yeah.
once in a while, so like right now, we're going through a drag down phase. I expect to die at 80, having lived through another Napoleon or a Hitler that dragged society in a different direction.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, well, history would suggest we do, because
Wow.
someone always comes. The
Yeah.
question is, what kind of change comes when he comes? Because whoever this figure is probably going to be Gen Alpha. He's going to grow up experiencing a world of chaos and disorder with mimetic tribes fighting everywhere, and they're probably going to hate him, and so it's going to give him fire to kind of go forward if he's
Hell
ever
yeah.
born yet,
So
or if she.
So this is making me think of something really interesting, which is that typically I would think about like let's say you have like you express it like society is pulling down, and it's up to these great people to like pull back up, or basically pull in that like synchronistic direction, like this destined direction that's like a large part of a larger thing. Now, in my mind, like even that force of the populace pulling down or degenerating or whatever, to me in my mind, it's almost like it's all part of the same like synchronicity or force on some larger scale, but
It is. It's pressure. By the way, the pressure that it creates with the tension in the center, you get all these crazy inventions and art and beautiful things.
yes. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's kind of what's all part of it. It's like as you break down that larger like in the larger synchronistic force, or what some people might call God, like everything is aligned and planned and perfect or whatever. But then when in that, you've got smaller entities that might be pulling in different directions. Like you've got agents of
That's
order,
why. That's why
agents of disorder.
That's why humanity jumps every dark age.
What do you mean?
Despair is raw pressure, and so it manufactures order.
Yeah, and it's like the cycle of civilizations, like good, or what is it, like strong men create good times create weak men create bad times create strong men.
The only outlier that I'm aware of is Africa, but honestly, we don't really know what happened to them and why they were so far back. So the further south and you go, the more Stone Age they were. And so the question is, well, did they just get started, or were they just slower, or maybe their civilization was newer, and so you have to solve for that.
So,
and they're about as aggressive now as we were about 3,000 years ago. So that would suggest that they either just started or they were reset somehow and became more aggressive.
So I feel like we're getting probably close to a good stopping point, but I do want to try to finish this frame. I think we're very close. We got to talking about like single-celled organisms, and though we don't have it perfectly understood, I know me personally, this is still the best theory, and I could still imagine the idea of leaping from non-matter to matter in like simple cell. So let's just assume for now that somehow that did happen through the soup and millions of years. We got single-celled organisms. Through another million years, we got multicellular organisms, and then we get we get sexual interactions or whatever, and then you get. It's the story of evolution from there. You've got plants, you've got basic, fish, and then some of the fish turn into amphibians, and then reptiles, and then this whole thing that we know of. And that pretty much leads us to some of the complexity we're in today, where you've got chimpanzees and other primates cooperating and kind of starting to turn into basically what are proto-humans. And then we have the story of recorded history at some point, where you've got what we know from that. So that's the full frame that brings us to today. That was quite the journey.
Yeah. It's a rough frame, but it's a frame.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. Yeah, that's what it's all about too. It's all about those levels of fidelity and granularity. Because like at the simplest, it's just like from literally like stars to Earth to humans. Okay, that's like super simple. Then we got to break it down, and we can break it down infinitely, right? So it's just like, and I think there might be good opportunities to like market it or like tell that story in a way that resonate, like with a 5-year-old, for example. Like how, and this is what I'm really interested about, like being able to interact with kids of my own one day, and like some of my nephews and stuff, like as they're starting to form their worldview, like how can you get some of these ideas across in the simplest way? So yeah, man, it's really exciting. I love it.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Well, I guess that's a good place to end it. We definitely have made that walk, and for anyone watching, and just for you as well. I don't know if you ever watched the new Cosmos. Like I know Neil Tyson has totally gone off the deep end with his bullshit, but the new Cosmos is super good visuals, and it's either the first one or it's the first episode or the second episode where they do a walk very much like what we just talked about. They use a cosmic calendar, and they say from the Big Bang to today, here's what that, and it's really, really good. And I may go watch it again now that we're talking about it. But yeah, so that'll be a good frame for us to keep building off of. I think it's really good. So
cool, man.
Alrighty, yeah, you got anything else? You good to leave it there?
Oh yeah, we're gonna there. My girlfriend's blowing up my phone, so I have to figure out what's going on there.
All right, man. Good luck. We'll talk to you soon. I enjoyed it.
All right, man. Talk later.
See ya.